All right, so show the screen. Good. Okay, so right, we're ready to go. So I'll pass you over to Mr. Williams. Tom, you ready?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Tom Williams here. Thank you, Peter, for that. Thank you, Rita. Now, what we've Gavin rang up earlier and said that he can't do his seminar for some reason or other, but he's put a lot of his newcomers over onto my seminar here. Now, what I'd like to do is, if you're new or not fully understand or even any idea what VSA is all about, could you type something in that box to indicate? Type N or yes, are you new? So we've got some idea who the audience is. There's quite a few of you at the moment, apparently. We apologize if you hear a lot of seagulls squawking, because we're not far from the beach here. Got a few, but not many, Reed. Well, you just heard Rita talk there. Now, Rita is a very fantastic typist, and she can type almost as fast as you can talk and look around the ceiling at the same time, which always amazes me. But I've dictated a short article because of the newcomers. A lot of newcomers are coming in, so I've got some idea what it's all about. But I'll get Rita to read that out to you in a moment. Perhaps, Rita, you could do it now. Now, Rita's going to read this article. If you've got any questions, please type them in.
Hi, hello everybody. Yeah, so Tom's started to dictate to me an introduction to VSA, which he says something that he's not really ever done before, although some of you may be aware that Tom Williams wrote a book. When did you write your book, Tom?
10 years ago.
About 10 years ago. It's called The Undeclared Secrets That Drive the Stock Market. And Peter, is it available on Amazon?
No, you have to email us.
Yeah, if you're interested, you can email us and we can send you a copy. So Tom wrote a book 10 years ago called The Undeclared Secrets That Drive the Stock Market, and that was the book that I personally read, though, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and from which I learnt how to trade. And since then, Tom's sort of been teaching over the web, but he hasn't particularly done any, apart from his newsletter, his weekly newsletter, which always comes out on a Sunday. He hasn't done any other books as such, but he started to dictate the following to me. So it says, in introduction to VSA, somebody said VSA sounds like a disease. However, the only connection is that once the principles are laid out to you, you will find it catching. So what exactly is VSA? It's a chart reading system, which of course the V stands for volume. Volume is the vertical bars that are usually supplied with your data seen at the bottom of the chart. Most people around the world have no real idea what is meant by volume, to such an extent that many people just simply ignore it. Volume, seen at the bottom of the chart as vertical lines, represents the activity of the professional players. By observing the volume, you know whether these professional players are either active or simply just average, or, which in our case is very important, whether they are not active. You observe the activity as seen in the volume, and on that amount of activity, what exactly did the price spread, that is the high and the low of the corresponding bar on the chart, do? The close is also reasonably important. There are a few things that you need to keep in mind. Markets are basically controlled by what we call the amount of supply or demand in the market. This supply and demand is created by the activity of the professional players, which can be high, average, or which is just as important, low activity. A few other points you should note. Because you are observing the activity of professional players, that is traders that can be trading thousands of contracts, weakness, as we recognize, will appear on up bars. These up bars are usually accompanied by the price spread between the high and the low narrowing. Now the reason for this narrowing is that professional players at some time, usually after a bullish move, will want to start taking profits, and the only real way they can get rid of thousands of contracts is as the market is moving up. And of course the narrowing of the spread is caused because every time buy orders arrive, these buy orders are readily satisfied by professionals unloading their holdings into the buying. This of course causes a narrowing of the spread. The exact opposite happens when they want to buy into the market. They can't buy into a rising market, so they have to buy into a falling market. This practically always has to happen after you've seen a substantial fall in the market. This creates what we call vulnerability. The low prices have now become attractive. This buying into a falling market usually causes the spread to narrow on the down bar. This is because buying is supporting the market. In other words, they are absorbing usually the panic selling from non-professionals. We can then usually see this happening because it will be accompanied by a surge in volume. We call this stopping volume. You need to be aware that the so-called professional players are fully aware of the effect of their actions on non-professional traders. The market makers are capable of marking the market up to catch stops, mislead as many non-professional traders as possible to benefit their own accounts. This is why we have principles like upthrust, where they can gun the market up to catch stops and to mislead all those traders that have gone long, who are now under pressure because the market appears to be going up and the market is in reality weak. Also, it helps to explain why we have what we call shakeouts. They are fully aware that a rapid fall in the market on so-called bad news will panic and dislodge many traders to unload their holdings, usually at a loss for them. This gives the professional player the opportunity to buy at low prices. Now, do we have confirmation of any of these principles occurring on our charts? Why, yes, we do. We do have a reliable way of confirming what I'm telling you. That, of course, is your personal computer, because we have computerized these principles into the program. And as you are fully aware, computers can only do what you told them to do. They certainly don't have a mind of their own. If you program in a telephone number incorrectly, the computer program will come to a full stop, completely unable to reconcile the mistake. So we have an automatic program, and if you consider the signals are reasonably accurate, in most cases very accurate, then the information that we are telling you is the only information that the computer has to work on. Computers simply do not understand your mistakes. So the chart is really a language speaking to you. We hold no secrets back, and if you hear any educator informing you that there are secrets, then you know you are being groomed to be led on the wrong path. Okay, I'm just flick back to, that's as far as we've got for that so far, but I'm just looking back to the questions. Yeah, Donald's saying yes, it's in Amazon. Yes, Tom's book is there, Peter. You put it on there.
No. I would check. Ask them to check the feedback, because the last seller I saw had poor feedback.
Right.
But, if you want, they want
okay.
To.
If you want, yeah. So Peter's saying the last seller had poor feedback. So who's sending them out?
Someone photocopied a load of.
Right.
Sent out photocopies.
Right. So
You want,
if you want the original hard copy of Tom's book, he'll personally sign it. Get in touch with us.
yeah, type
What
it in,
to,
type
which
it into
my
the
email?
questions, and we'll make a note.
What my email?
Yeah.
Here you go. That's my email. Anyway. Okay. Can you please analyse? I have many cases I do not fully understand. Where is Gavin? I don't know. Gavin is otherwise occupied. He won't be on this seminar. Okay. Right, Tom, here you are.
Well, I hope that's of some help. See, people come in, I call it coming in from the cold. Lots of them got absolutely no idea how the markets really work. They've been misled and mistold and all sorts of things for so long. Now, oddly enough, the people that come in that have never had anything to do with the market very often do better because their minds are not polluted. They're not confused in any way. It's all new to them, which is very interesting. Of course, I have my pet theory about the so-called mathematical formulas. And of course, what they are is that out there's some very, very clever people. Matter of fact, they're so clever, they probably put Albert Einstein, Faraday, and Thomas Edison in the shade at times, believe me. Now, if there was a simple mathematical formula around that was reliable enough, they would have spotted that years ago, and they would be onto it. And the fact is that they would have recognized it and would have traded it. It would be traded out of existence. In other words, it wouldn't be there in hindsight for you to see. That's my theory, and I think that's why people have trouble with these formulas. But with VSA, with the volume spread analysis, they can't hide what they're actually doing. But it's an art. It's quite hard work trading, but we're working hard to make it a lot better, obviously, and we have great plans ahead for the future. Anyway, get back to reality now. If you have any questions, please type them in for Rita and she'll read them out. Now, they can see my chart, can they? Good. Now, this is an actual 7-minute, I believe, is it? Yes. 7 of the mini S&P 500. Right. Now, what we're looking for is what we call principles. Now, the first principle, of course, we can see we've got an indication of weakness there, sort of selling pressure. It's really like an upthrust, isn't it? Look. This, you can make money on these if you're aware of them, right? And they're fairly easy to recognize. They've marked it up, look. It's closed in the middle. The volume is relatively slightly increased. Don't forget this is the overnight session, right? So the market's weak. You'll find in a weak market, any blue up bars like that will be on low volume. Sorry, it's updating. Right, so it'll be on low volume, look. Okay, so market falls. Now what we're looking for is what Rita just read out, right? What we're looking for is stopping volume. And lo and behold, the market falls, look. Right? Professional money have to buy into the market in a falling market, which if you think about it, is quite logical. And there's the volume, look. There's the high activity. Right? So you know, or you suspect, probably put it that way, right, that they're buying into the market. Now, the principle that we need, we don't simply go long on that. what we're looking for is what we call confirmation. Right, so the market responds by going up a bar or two in response to that buying, look. That is a weakish looking bar, but the market falls. What we want is the market to fall back down. I'll draw a line along there. Back down to the level where the volume was first seen. And that was round about that line there. Okay, so we're looking for that. And we know if the volume is then low, right, low activity, here's the red down bar, it's even closed almost in the middle, look. But it's back down to that level where the volume first appeared. The volume is now low. So that must indicate, can't mean anything else, is that as they market it up, the professional side of the market are not interested in lower prices. Right, because the volume is low. It's closed almost in the middle, look. Not to mention the fact that the next bar is up. And that's the reason why you take that view is because of this stopping volume here. Here. There it is. Okay. So they start marking up. Once they know they're bullish like that, these wide spreads are not by accident. They're done deliberately to lock really traders out of the market. In other words, even if you observe that, right, and you were skillful enough to read the chart and say, right, that's it, they're buying. Okay. If you hesitated and suddenly turn around and you've got these wide spreads up like this, then it tends to put you off, doesn't it? And of course, if you've shorted the market because you don't know what you're doing here, these sudden prices tend to lock you in. Right? Now, what we're looking for is when you see these wide spreads up, especially as it pushes up through a supply to the left, what we'd love to see is a test. A test, right, is a down bar, low volume, narrow spread, hopefully closing in middle or high. Right, so bang. Lo and behold, look. We have a red down bar. Now the computer tells us more or less what it is. Right, what did I say? It's a down bar, yeah. I said the volume needs to be low, yes. The spread needs to be narrow. Ooh, look. And it usually closes in the middle. So there's the computer. It's told you. Your friend. You can't argue with a computer. It's either there or isn't there. Now I know it's a matter of concentration. That's the problem with trading. But we're developing systems to overcome that. Okay, so the market moves up on that test. But it is now beginning to round over, look. And we have a sign of weakness here. Weakness has appeared. So now, I mean, don't forget, my analysis here is for scalping traders. This is not managing your pension or whatever. For that, you need to look at longer term charts. But we don't really have time in these hour sessions Friday to talk about that. But we do have an expert, Philip Tristan, who is actually a fund manager. And that's how he trades and handles his account here. Right? But what we're interested in really is scalping. In other words, we take a trade, we're in it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour perhaps. Right, then we take the profit, go make a cup of tea. So that's what I personally find a bit more interesting at this stage. Now, you can see here we've got a bit of weakness appearing on this chart, and notice that weakness is portrayed by what we call a mushroom effect. The market tends to mushroom overlook. Now, it doesn't matter what time frame you look at, the information will be there on all of them, which is a mystery to some people, but there you are. So look, there's a 5 minute. We'll look at that. What? Is that 5 minutes? Right. So there we are. Still the same testing look going on. There it is. One. Mark it up. There's the test there. Okay. But as you practice and get used to this, you'll find it such a fascinating subject. And you know that you must be on the correct way of thinking. And don't forget that once you master this, or learn how to come to grips with reading these charts, you'll have that skill and knowledge with you for the rest of your life. And I can assure you, you'll never ever regret it, because you're actually looking at what the so-called smart money is doing. Now, Gavin comes up with the word smart money, professional money, traders. These are traders that will trade thousands of contracts, 50, 40, 60,000 contracts at a time or more. And it's their influence in the market that shifts the balance of supply and demand. I mean, to buy, when you see stopping volume, they actually bully their way into the market. And it's usually done on bad news, perhaps, or negative news. You hear these. Well, why do you think they let come out with reports at 1:30, or just before the market opens in America, an hour before? So you can come up with all this sort of news that will influence you, and the trading community can take advantage of it, because they're out to mislead you. That's how they make their money. They need movement.
Questions, Tom?
Questions, Rita said.
Go back to the 7 minute charts that we were on. So Chris is asking you, obviously you must have been talking about a test here on the 7 minute chart, Tom. Where would you put the stop if you go long on the test? That was one question. And then Winston is asking, is the widespread red down bar also a part of the stopping volume? And is that strength or weakness? So we'll have to assume that you're talking about... Yeah, can you move the thing? Yeah, you need to move. That's it. We'll assume that you're talking about that. So Winston is saying, is that a part of the stopping volume, or is that strength or weakness? And Chris is asking, where would you put the stop if you go long on the test?
Well, once you understand the principle of a stop, right, you'll see they love to do this so-called testing, especially in a strong market, right? Now, we can't tell you exactly where to put stops and do this and do that. That's not our business. We're here trying to teach you to read, how to read these markets, right? And it's a matter of perseverance and time with you, and you'll master it as well. I mean, Rita here, she came here a few years ago not knowing anything at all about the stock market. Now she makes money on all these upthrusts and everything. It's wonderful. So it is possible. So as far as where normally with a stop, you put it on what we call an odd number. Below the last reaction is the best place. Now, why do you put it on an odd number? Because professional money know, right, that the herd or the mass, most people, think in even numbers. And they tend to put their stops on even numbers. So if they're gunning for stops, right, and they want to trigger these stops off, which is very profitable to them, right, they will definitely want to gun, certainly for the even numbers, because that's where most of the stops are, on even numbers. So if you put it on an odd number, then you stand a little bit more chance of not getting triggered off. But normally you put it under the last reaction. And of course a stop in a rising market, it's a very bullish sign, and they won't gun for your stop anyway. Now, as far as the widespread down that we're looking at here, which is so-called stopping volume, look, right, we're not sure, to be quite honest, exactly at that stage, although we assume it's buying, because the market has become vulnerable. The market has fallen, and you know that professional money will be interested in lower prices, and they won't be interested until lower prices are reached. But we suspect that. But we don't exactly know at that stage. But what confirms it is this test. This is the key to it here. Once you see this down bar at that level, and the volume is low, right, that means that the trading is virtually non-existent, and professional money will not sit there, right, and not trade. If it was bearish, for example, they would mark it on down. But as soon as you see that low volume, at that area, level's the important thing. Where the volume was high, look, or the activity was high, you suspect it's going to go up. Well, you know it's going to go up. Does that make sense?
Okay. Right. So we were talking about Tom's book. Paul is saying, Tom, your earlier book, The Undeclared Secrets That Drive the Stock Market, which I bought around 1981 or 82, you kindly printed me off a pre-published loose leaf copy, which I still treasure, he said. That book tells the story so clearly and would benefit the members by reprinting. Thank you for my copy.
Okay.
So is that that's the one that we've got? Yeah. Okay. So Donald is asking, all bars with low volume and narrow spreads, are they no demand? Is that correct? All bars with low volume and narrow spread.
Well, the big question is, which you haven't mentioned, is it an up bar or down bar? If it's an up bar, right, you can bet your bottom dollar it's no demand. But if it's a down bar, you can bet your bottom dollar that there's no selling pressure. So you must realize that whether the bar is up or whether it's down is very, very important, which is all very logical. That's what people like about VSA, is that we can explain the logic behind everything. And normally you listen to the logic, you nod your head with a grin on your face to say, well, of course, I never thought of that. Right?
On that subject with high volume now, Robert's asking, how would you interpret high volume narrow bars, up bars or down bars?
Well, we know that whenever the volume is high, we know that the activity is high. In other words, they're busy. Now, if you have, for example, weakness in the background, like an upthrust, or you've had quite a bullish move, right, the market becomes vulnerable to some professional traders, if not all, would like to detach themselves from the market, right? And the best way to do that, if possible, is on up bar. Now, market makers are quite capable of marking the market up. Just like an auctioneer, an auction can hold a vase, antique vase, and mark the price up or down, whatever he wants to do with it. They're quite capable of doing that, right? So if you see an up bar and the spread has narrowed, right, and the volume is very high, and you've got weakness in the background of some sort, that's all you need. You can bet your bottom dollar that's weakness. Now, of course, what's good about these principles is the opposite must be true for down bar. If you've seen the market fall fairly substantially and suddenly you get a down bar on a narrow spread, as a matter of fact, I don't know whether we can print out that text you typed, Rita. It says there about how spreads will appear on a down bar and then will narrow the spread because they're buying into the panic selling. There's always a percentage. They don't always, the public are not always selling all the time, but there's a percentage, and that's what they're after. So buying, right, when the market's vulnerable, in other words, it's fallen, the lower prices become attractive. Professional money gun it down as much as possible, hopefully on some sort of bad news or some sort of negative news, which is usually a load of nonsense, to be quite honest. And you see the volume very high, you know the professional money is stepping in, buying into the market. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Tom is asking, could VSA have predicted the fall in the market last week? Please, could you explain how using the charts?
Right. Well, we would have looked at that in the newsletter. I'm not quite. Oh, we didn't do a newsletter, no. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Of course, we didn't do a newsletter last Sunday for various reasons we won't bore you with, but so that was the fall there, was it?
What day was that?
So that's the 31st.
Thursday, was it? Friday.
So it must have been around about there. Well, I think we've been weak in the newsletters. If you look at our newsletters, most of them, I mean, there's a very weak bar right there, look. Right?
Why is it weak, Tom?
Why is it weak? Because we've had an up move behind us, right? So we know professional money will want to start taking profits. They certainly want to be locked in on their up move. So we have a bar that's been marked up, look. It's gapped up, so it has to be artificial. But look at that narrow spread. Now you read that article that Rita's just read out to you, which I'll get Peter to put up for you. It's up on a narrow spread, look. And the narrow spread is caused by the market makers marking it up to try to mislead you as much as possible. And the narrow spread's caused because every time now it's marked up, right, there's sell orders. They're selling into the buying. Could have been some good news or something, so-called good news. And then this here looks suspiciously weak. I'm sure I would have picked all this up on the newsletter that we do every Sunday. We do have weakness around in the background, look. So what you've got to remember or keep in mind, that whatever the market is doing today or now is due to the background information. It's due to what happened probably the last few days or even week or so. Professional money, they know, they can see this weakness and they will want to unload, or if they think it's strong, they want to buy into the market. Markets don't suddenly decide to shoot up or down, say today. It's caused through background information, which you can see usually on the charts here. Now don't forget, this is a daily chart, but I know there'd be a hell of a lot more information, say on the hour chart. And that's interesting. When you look at these smaller time frames, you can see them selling. You can see the upthrust easier. You can see what's happening very, very often. Does that make sense?
Okay, quite a while ago, Louis asked for us to bring up the dollar versus the yen chart to analyse, Tom.
The dollar yen, right. Well, immediately you can see there's weakness here, look. Right, the market's been marked up, look. Okay, we've got some strength here. But suddenly it runs into a wall. And there it is, look. High volume. Markets don't like high volume on up bars, especially after an up move. Now, of course, if that extra high volume there, the computer will probably tell you it's very high or ultra high. If that was buying, then how can you get these down bars in red? How can that be falling off? Surely. But the vulnerability's there because you've got this up move behind you. Right? Now, okay, they know perfectly well the market's now weak. So they say, right, let's have a nice little up thrust here. Right, there it is. We'll catch a load of stops. Lots of people that are still long, right? We don't want them selling. We want to catch them in our down move, right? They'll think, oh, there you go, the market's going up now, so we're okay. And that's why when you get these fairly obvious signs of weakness, you get these rapid down moves afterwards. It's the professional money locking in what we call traders, right? Usually non-professionals. And they've now become what we call weak holders. And so those weak holders, they'll want to shake out of the market eventually at lower prices.
Okay, so Winston is asking, Tom, can you explain these indicators? No supply or test after a shakeout. Is there a difference between a test and a basic test?
Well, a test is a test. You know, if you were an alien and you saw a human being, you might say, well, a human being is a human being, but what's this this basketball player one? Is he a human being? You know, it's a test. It's a professional money testing the market, right? And there's no difference. It's an art looking at these things. You know that if it's a down bar and the volume is reduced, especially if the volume is low, and especially if the spread's narrow, you know it's a successful test. It's supply they're looking for. If you're a professional player and you've loaded up with 50,000 contracts, right, and you're wondering whether to stay long or even buy some more, what you want to know is, if possible, what's the view of other professionals? So if they gun the market down, other professionals will panic if they're not bullish, or if they're bullish, right? But if the volume is low, activity is low, what it's telling you is that everybody else is not interested in lower prices. Now, we've said before that Philip Friston, our fund manager, who's an expert VSA, did a very good seminar on testing. Do you remember what the date was, Rita?
April 2011, I think. I should know by now. I think it's April 2011, but there is a recording in the VSA Club archives. Tests.
Now, it's very important testing because it's a money-making thing. I mean, we looked at tests yesterday, made money on them yesterday. I was looking at the 20-minute chart. There was two of them, very, very good ones. Mind, we're talking about scalping here. We're not talking about going to the moon for the next 2 years. Now, apparently Gavin has sent out in the past 2 alerts, and he's asked Rita to put them up and have a look at them. We're just trying to look at that.
Okay, so Gavin called earlier and asked if we'd mention on here, because there are some people here who are very, very new to VSA, and he wanted you to know about tradingthemarkets.com. I'm going to put the